Hey, how's it going, guys? Welcome to another video in the Versus series. Now, I haven't done one of these Versus videos in a long time. It's actually been about 2 or 3 months. The last one I did was the AMD Radeon HD 7870 versus the GTX 660. And finally, I'm getting around to doing another one of these. This is going to be the 7770 versus the GTX 650. I think a lot of people are going to like this since I get this question all the time on which one of these graphics cards to get. And this is more on the budget side compared to the 7870 and the 660. These two cards costed anywhere from $80 to $100. So this is really good for the budget-minded gamer. Also, the 7770 does cost a little bit more than the GTX 650. It's about a $10 price difference. Originally, I wanted to do the 7770 versus the 650 Ti, but the 650 Ti is like $30 to $40 more expensive than the 7770, so I really couldn't do a good comparison of those two. The 650 and the 7770 are the closest in price comparison, so this is the fairest way to do the video. So yeah, with that being said, let's get straight into this. Also, this was done on a PC with an i5-3570K OC to 4.2 GHz, 8GB of RAM, a 120GB SSD, and an Asus P8Z77, just to get that out of the way. So let's get right into this with the first game, and I think this is the game that most people want me to talk about, and that's Battlefield 3. Definitely the most fan-friendly game. Battlefield 3, you know, that's a game that typically NVIDIA has a slight edge on. I don't know what it is, but NVIDIA cards typically do better than AMD cards. This game was definitely the one with the smallest gap, but the 7770 does edge it out the 650. The 7770 scores 27 frames per second, while the 650 scores 23 frames per second. Now, keep in mind, this is at 1080p with all settings maxed. Typically, when you are playing on these lower-end cards, you probably do want to lower the resolution or lower the settings, but just to compare apples to apples, figured just do 1080p everything max. So, yeah, the 7770 does edge out the 650. Both of them, the 7770 is at that cusp of being playable. The 650 I wouldn't say would be playable at this resolution and these settings. The 7770 definitely, for both cards, I'd recommend you lower the settings, lower the resolution, and that's to be expected on these lower end cards, but the 7770 does win in Battlefield 3. Alright, next game. Not the hardest game to run in the world, but the next game is The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Now, this is another game where the 7770 definitely edges out the 650. The 7770 at 1080p max settings. No ENB mod, by the way. The ENB mod I would think would crush these cards. I haven't tested that, but the 7770 scores 48 frames per second, and the GTX 650 scores 36 frames per second. Both of these are playable at 1080p at ultra settings, but the 7770 definitely getting a higher frame rate. The 7770 actually might even be able to handle the ENB mod. That's a very intensive graphical mod. The 650, if you want to run that mod, you're probably going to have to lower the resolution, so just keep that in mind. But the 7770 definitely wins in Skyrim with a 12 frames per second lead. And like I said, if you guys pick up a 7770, be sure to download that ENB mod just to test it out. If it does work, I'll probably test that out eventually and upload a video of that. But yeah, moving on to the next game. Another game that a lot of people like to test out, and that is Crysis 3. Now, this is a game that you definitely do not want to be playing at 1080p with all settings maxed out. In this test, I actually had to turn off anti-aliasing, because if you turn on anti-aliasing, these cards are going to get like 2 frames per second. So with anti-aliasing disabled, the 7770 scores 26 frames per second, while the GTX 650 scores 19 frames per second. I would consider both of these unplayable, with the 7770 being sort of playable at times, but when you get to points with a lot of explosions and whatnot, the frame rate's going to take a gigantic dip. And Crysis 3, when you get out in the wilderness, holy shit, there's a lot of things going on, and the frame rate's going to drop really quickly. So this is another game you're going to want to lower the settings because of these cards. You know, price range, they're not the best cards in the world, but they're very good for the budget-minded gamer. The 7770 wins this round again with a 7 frames per second lead, and the 650 lags behind again at 19 frames per second, while the 7770 scores 26 frames per second. The final game that was tested was Far Cry 3. Now, keep in mind, this is at 1080p with MSAA off. You need a really high-end rig to run Far Cry 3 with MSAA. 7770 scores 29 frames per second, while the 650 scores 22 frames per second. Now, 29 frames per second is pretty playable. I'd actually, 29 frames per second, that's almost 30, so maybe if you turn down 1 or 2 settings at 1080p, you'll get above 30, and then you'll be golden with the 7770. The 650, once again, lags behind by 7 frames per second, so 7770 edges this out in our final test as well. So definitely, if you guys have that extra $10 to spend, get the 7770 over the 650, because the 7770 has about a 20 to 30 20% performance increase from every game. So 7770 is a far better choice. Not to take anything away from Nvidia, they do have a lot of great cards. The 650 definitely is not one of them when compared to the 7770. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Remember to subscribe, like this video, comment, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.